roadblocks against the Trump administration and his Doge agenda to gut and clean house at the federal government, getting rid of all the waste, both in how we spend money and in all these feckless and useless employees. Despite all the attempts to slow him down, the Trump agenda continues to march forward. And this includes the mass firings of federal employees. And naturally, this is causing left-wing pundits to wring their hands in despair. Because as the Trump administration ramps up their efforts, it is going to make it ever harder to try and claw back what Trump is doing here. Now, to talk about this, let's pull up an article from Axios. This is by our favorite Emily Peck, who writes, White House firings continues despite speed bumps. Emily writes, the Trump administration's efforts to purge the federal workforce are hitting speed bumps, but they're not stopping. Oh no, writes Emily. Why it matters. The firing of tens of thousands of employees happened lightning fast, and more are coming. In the meantime, workers are eyeing the exits, and the ability of critical government agencies to function is at stake. Let's zoom in, Emily writes. In 2 words, an IRS employee who recently resigned from the agency explained why. This unnamed unknown person said, it's the uncertainty. There was the return to office order, but no office to go to. The agency didn't have the space for him. Then there was the fork in the road push to resign, rumors of layoffs and firings of probationary employees. And now the IRS plans to cut its workforce in half, according to the New York Times. Are we going to have a job next week in office? The IRS employee said, requesting anonymity because he's still working there for a few more days. And Axios is right here. According to multiple reports in the news, the IRS, or the Internal Revenue Service, is drafting plans to dramatically reduce its workforce. On the chopping block, apparently, is roughly 50% of the staff, which could affect up to 45,000 out of its approximately 90,000 person staff. The IRS is reportedly preparing to achieve this reduction through a combination of layoffs, attrition, which means not replacing employees who leave, and incentivized buyouts. And if you're feeling a little bit deja vu about all of this, rest assured you're not wrong. That is because just last month, the IRS fired over 6,000 probationary employees, those with roughly 1 year or less of service. What's happening here is all about slashing the bloat, getting rid of the feckless employees who shouldn't be there, as well as rooting out the so-called deep state employees, those who operate against the will of the administration, those that are working for themselves and their own nameless, faceless desires and motivations. Where it stands, Emily writes, yesterday the USDA was ordered to reinstate nearly 6,000 employees. Last week, a federal judge ruled the initial order from the Office of Personnel Management to fire probationary workers was unlawful. Though the judge ruled that OPM's orders were illegal, he did not order employees be reinstated for technical reasons, including the plaintiffs standing to sue and the fact that agencies weren't named defendants. The plaintiffs hope the judge will eventually issue such an order, but they must first amend their lawsuit and have another court hearing next week. Between the lines, Emily writes, even as some of these fired workers are reinstated, agencies are moving ahead with the next step. Oh no. There are plans to do wide-scale reductions in force that will be much harder to overturn. In a leaked memo, the Department of Veterans Affairs has outlined its intention to return to 2019 staffing levels, which would mean firing as many as 83,000 workers. They hired 83,000 new workers. That is nearly a 20% increase. The hell did we need this many new employees for? This is similar to the IRS trying to hire 90,000 new IRS agents. I don't know about you, but I really don't trust the Biden administration's decisions here. Now, in the meantime, Emily writes, federal workers are in a terrible spot with no severance, no benefits, and for some, unemployment insurance may be tricky to secure. Michelle Evermore, a senior fellow at the National Academy for Social Insurance, told Axios. The bottom line, Emily writes, firings once set in motion are hard to slow down. And that, my friends, is a good thing. Now, I want to talk about these reports that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is planning to fire these 83,000 workers as part of their sweeping reorganization under the Trump administration's push to downsize the federal government as a whole. The VA currently employs now over 482,000 workers. 482,000. This is a massive increase under the Biden administration, nearly a 20% increase for the VA. This was all part of their implementation of the 2022 PACT Act. Now, leftists are losing their minds over this. Democrats and far-left radicals have been letting loose their outrage over these firings. They are trying to frame this whole thing as an assault on veterans and federal workers. You've got people like Senator Richard Blumenthal, who's on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, who's predicting chaos and is accusing the administration of undermining the PACT Act's progress, which expanded health care and necessitated all this hiring. And then you have Representative Mark Takano, his House counterpart, who warned of crippled services, delays in benefits, claims processing, and student veteran support. You've got people like Senator Pat Murray calling it infuriating the two billionaires, Trump and Musk, could disrupt care for millions, while Representative Nikki Budzinski questioned how cutting suicide hotline staff serve veterans. And of course, the labor unions have mobilized as well. You have the American Federation of Government Employees, or AFGA, representing 311,000 VA workers. They're labeling this a full-scale assault, with President Everett Kelly asserting that veterans and their families will suffer unnecessarily by these cuts. But the question I have to ask is, will they really? The reality, my friends, is this. The VA, prior to the Biden administration, was home to 399,957 employees as of 2019. The Biden administration started hiring tens of thousands, roughly 80,000 new people, once he got into office. Now, yes, there was the PACT Act, but why on earth did we have to grow this agency by almost 20%? Considering all the chaos, considering all the waste, the corruption that the Biden administration was, I find this mass hiring a bit suspicious. Who are these people? It seems unlikely that the federal government actually needed this many new employees. So what was the purpose here? Instead of hiring all this bloat, all this waste, they could have been working on fixing their grossly inefficient design. That would have been infinitely more useful and effective for patients of the VA. Instead, all this new hiring, all this new bloat of employees is costing the U.S. taxpayers over $10 billion a year. And what do you think we got for all this new bloat and all this new waste? Well, according to the VHA, Undersecretary Sharif Elinahal, Sharif claimed that wait times dropped due to the hiring and access sprints, meaning opening up night and weekend clinics, with primary care waits falling from 25 days back in 2019 to 18 days in 2023. Sure, for $10 billion a year in salaries alone, we get a 7-day wait reduction, but you're still having to wait over 2 weeks before you get to even see a primary care doctor. That is ridiculous. That is absurd. In the private sector, take one of the larger healthcare providers on the West Coast, Kaiser Permanente, they offer same-day appointments in many cases. Let's compare this output of the VA with a regular healthcare industry in the private sector. Per total employee for the VA, meaning out of all the 482,000 people that we employ at this agency, per total employee of the VA, meaning out of all the 482,000 people that are employed by this agency, on average, if you combine them all up, they're seeing 270 patients per employee. Now, let's take a look at the private sector. On average, the per employee average for seeing patients per employee is somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000. This is a massive disparity. Out of all the 482,000 employees at the VA sucking up paychecks from you and me, the American people, just 7% are actually doctors. That's 35,000 doctors out of 482,000 people employed at the VA. Now, yes, you've got to count that there are also clinicians and nurses. That's fine. But all of the rest of these people working at the VA, these drones, are there for logistics, facilities, or providing benefits. What this means is, out of the 482,000 employees working at the federal government, there are somewhere between 192 to 242,000 people in non-clinical roles at the VA. This means janitors. This means ID department, claims processors, managers, etc. Compare this to the private sector. Kaiser Permanente and Mayo Clinic, for example. They run on an average of 3 to 5 people operating as support staff for each doctor. But the VA is operating at 12-to-1 ratio of support staff per doctor. This is insane. This is stupid. It's gross mismanagement. It's classic federal incompetence. This is the type of slop, the type of ridiculous BS that our wonderful taxpayer dollars are paying for. This is why I have zero sympathy when I hear about mass firings at the VA or any other federal agency for that matter. They're all the same here. They all need a dramatic slashing. I wouldn't be surprised if you could fire half of all the civilian federal government employees and not even notice that they're gone. And while all of this is happening, you get all these moronic, retarded politicians like Bernie Sanders going out there complaining about the millionaires and billionaires not paying their fair share. We wouldn't need to tax people more if you'd stop spending so damn much on nothing. We need massive firings here all across the board. These guys provide terrible service for the money that we are doling out by the bucket load. The VA should be the pinnacle of medical operations in the U.S. for the amount of money that we throw away there. At the minimum, what should happen here is you double the doctors on staff and you fire half of the rest. I bet you we'd see better results for our poor veterans who are being abused by this stupid, absurd system. Instead, all we get are these politicians and these feckless unions worried about their useful idiot employees that are getting fired. Well, I, for one, won't shed a single tear when they're all gone.